My writing course my freshman year changed my life. It changed my life more than any other course I took in college.
So I feel connected through my writing. And it certainly made me think about things and question things in a way that I never would have done had I not written so many essays.
You'll just have certain epiphanies. It's kind of strange, you know, like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, even 4 o'clock in the morning, everything just will start to click.
I couldn't imagine college without writing now, because that was the time that I really feel that I learned the most.
It made me claim the classes, it made me claim the text, it made me claim what I was reading, and I loved it.
I wrote a lot in school.
I won an award for Essay of the Year at my high school. And then in my interview, my interviewer looked at that essay and said, well, your writing needs a lot of help, but we have programs for people like you.
So in terms of writing, I was probably pretty scared initially and wasn't sure what to expect and shied away even from majors, which were going to require me to write a lot.
I was placed into the expository writing 10 is I think what it was called, which is the first. So it means that, you're not there. You need some brushing up. And of course I was like floored. I couldn't believe it.
My first meeting for my writing study course with my instructor, we kind of sat down to discuss my essay. She gives me a C+. I was like, a C+?
And so I felt coming in, I was already at kind of a disadvantage. I wasn't a very good writer and I had a lot to learn.
But I guess on the other hand, it was really kind of motivating. So in a way it was, okay, there's actually a lot of room for improvement.
About literature, that has to be clear. And if it's
For me, it was really the academic challenge. It was like every student here, how could I possibly have gotten in first? And then second, no, really, I don't even speak English. How could they possibly have let me in?
We sort of bring them into this world, at least at first somewhat naked. They haven't really done this before, and asking them to conduct themselves like academics. That's difficult. That's a challenge.
I came in as a pretty shy student in terms of what I was going to be willing to contribute to my sections, and then through the writing, I felt a lot more comfortable talking about the issues.
One of the biggest struggles that I had freshman year with writing was in using sources in a very specific way. So I spoke in these vast generalities, and sometimes I just completely wrong, which is 2 no-nos in one. But gradually I learned to pick small parts of a book or small parts of an idea and to really focus on that and say what I meant.
Once I had realized that someone was actually reading my papers, then all these other concepts became open to me, like counter-argument and like critical distance, where you need to consider that the person who's reading your paper may have their own ideas.
It's the most difficult skill that there is to communicate precisely on paper with no body language, no tone, no waving of your arm, no widening your eyes, no whispering, but just getting exactly the right words in exactly the right order. That is the hardest thing to do.
It's a struggle. It's not this neat process where all the facts fit together neatly and you just come out with this nice little thing at the end. A lot of times you'll come up with things that disagree with each other. You'll come up with a complex source that seems fully credible, that supports your opinion, and then another one that doesn't at all.
It was very hard learning how to put an argument together that was founded in examples that people could follow, that had some kind of logical progression to it.
But as you start to sort of funnel it down, winnow it down to a theme, a thesis that makes sense and that coheres, you start making sense of all these differences.
In assigning a final paper in a class, very often I'll say, first thing to do is to get a topic, and the second thing is to ask a question. What do you really want to find out? And in order to write a good paper, you have to find your own question and pursue it.
Is it original? Is it interesting? Has it been said before? Would someone want to read about this at all? And then I would go at it from there, and I would do an outline.
And a lot of times you come up with something that's very different from what you had expected at the beginning. You may start out writing one paper and you end up with another.
Revision is so important, and the first draft of an essay is never a good draft. I learned that I can sit down and reread an essay and always change it and always revise it.
You discover a lot of what you have to say in the course of putting word after word and sentence after sentence. You discover by the end of the paper what it is that you think. So if you just leave it at that and hand in the paper, you've cheated yourself of the greatest chance, which is to go back to the beginning, having concluded the process of writing, and write the whole thing again in light of what you've discovered.
Very often we're sure that the reader will get it, the reader doesn't. Almost everything that a student writes is subject to either feedback from me or from the other students in the class, or both. And at least in the the first third of the semester, what I'm saying to students is, first of all, what do you really mean here? And then I very often say, well, do you really mean that? And their faces sort of collapse because, no, they didn't really mean that. They're writing in a way that they think is how they should be writing.
So I went into the feedback session. She said, tell me what it was that you wanted to say. And so, I just said it. And then she said, write that. So I rewrote it, and it was very different from the one that I originally turned in.
Is that kind of what you're trying to...
I wrote one paper on a poem about the Titanic, and I started off with many great things have been said about the Titanic. And when this instructor read it, he said, what are you saying here? Everyone knows this. You just said something that is completely and totally obvious. If it's completely obvious, it's not worth saying in your paper.
One of the things I wanted to teach in the classroom was not only how to write papers for me, but how to write papers for each other. And we pre-circulated the draft, so all the students read each other's work. And I think they, in fact, work harder when they're writing for each other.
I would get back constructive comments and questions that made me think rather than give up or say, this is overwhelming.
He basically said, I think you can try something harder. Make it more interesting for yourself. Pick the thing that you actually care about and is hard for you. Pick the part that's really hard. Pick what doesn't make sense and write about that. Have more guts, basically.
Well, I always tell students that criticism is a two-way process. That they're not simply supposed to take the criticism and fix it. They're supposed to think about the criticism and think about it in the context of what choices they made.
You can even argue with the feedback. It's not just a correction process. It's also kind of a self-examination process.
The first religion course I took in my department, in the comparative study of religion, it was a sophomore tutorial. And the first thing my head of department told us was question everything. When you read an article, what are the author's intentions? What's the author's background? Where do they want to take you? And could you look up those sources, and are they really there? Question everything.
It's vital for them not to distrust sources, but to interrogate sources, and that can only be achieved by reading them with great care.
It was amazing to see how much you got out of repeatedly reading a passage, and that was the whole point of close reading, was I'm not just reading this and moving on or reading it to pick out an idea. It's I'm stopping, I'm reading it, looking for clues, reading it again, looking for more, reading it again, looking for another level of understanding.
The problem with the piece of evidence can be part of, should be, ought to be, is very often very useful as part of your argument.
The best document that I ever wrote was my senior thesis. I wrote about wheat on the Great Plains, and I wrote about how wheat was important in settling the Great Plains. And I examined all the old booster literature from the 1830s and 1840s that said, "Go west, young man." And I read through those things, and I saw this theme of wheat appearing again, almost like a religious gospel. And then I remembered back to my own Catholic upbringing and how we would sing in church about "unless a grain of wheat may fall." And I started to turn these ideas over in my head, and I said, there's something here. And then I looked at the way railroads were set up and the way the transportation corridors were built onto the plains and how they were built around wheat and in making it easy to get this commodity to market.
Different disciplines have different forms, but also different structures and different goals in their writing.
Philosophy writing has such a different style than historical writing and English writing. And I guess learning a different style is also part of considering an audience and considering what types of questions are appropriate.
I remember the first scientific paper I ever turned in, it was like 10 pages long. And like when I got it back, most of it had just red lines all through it. You need to really work on being terse, precise, exact, but still at the same time conveying everything that you need to.
I have many times encountered students who have the idea that you don't need to be much concerned about writing if you're a scientist because it's just cut and dried and all the rest. And of course, then I disabuse them the best I can of that notion, largely by preaching and by pointing to them writings by outstanding scientists and remarking how the influence of this scientist was particularly great because he was so effective as a writer and a speaker.
I think the most important role that writing played in my undergraduate education was giving me ownership over what I was studying. You really take whatever you've been working on and you make it your own and you think of something interesting within it, and it does sort of feel like maybe you're the first person to think that, or maybe you're the first person to think of it in this particular way, and there's something very exciting about that.
It's yours to keep, and it's your it's your right, as it were, to take this idea and to explore it. And if you do it well, then you can hold it up afterwards and say, I think this is a reasonable argument. It's up to you now to prove that this is not reasonable or that this is wrong.
I took many courses where conversations and the lectures were really, really great, but you forget those over time. Whereas when you put things on paper, you can go back to them all the time and look at them and remember issues that really moved you or that really interested you, and essentially you kind of engrave your thought.
Writing puts students right in the middle of their own liberal arts education. It asks students to confront opposing points of view, to be able to move from having an opinion to having an idea, and to understand why you care about that idea. That seems to me what the goal of liberal arts education is really about.
The best piece of advice I learned when I give to my students is, when you're writing, always wear socks. Writing is so lonely and difficult and challenging, so you should make yourself as comfortable as possible.
Everyone who writes understands you don't know what you think until you write.
The part I really enjoyed was being able to get to that, what feels like core, and being able to fight with it and commit it to paper.
Sometimes I couldn't quite do it, and for example, yesterday I was working on my master's thesis and I just got to the conclusion and said, I just can't write this right now. And then this morning I woke up early in the morning and I sat back down. I got into a rhythm and I got through it.
It was almost a dynamic process. In some ways, something that's coming from you, but at the same time, there's almost something that can push back against you, you can react to, and that then turns around and shapes you, which is a pretty amazing process.